Hey everyone, Paige Neil from Newbie Dice here, and I've got the new mic, so I hope you enjoy the dulcet tones coming out of my mouth right now. We have an interesting video today, so I'll go straight into it. Today I'm going to talk about the new concealed and obscured rules wording, as well as the ignore concealed and ignore obscured rules wording, and how I would write the rules if it were me. Okay. So to talk about it, I would like to share the history of why we landed here on this video, because I just did a podcast video recently reviewing all the changes in the Big Red Book. So if you'd like to watch it, you can watch it somewhere over here on the top right of the screen. And I did have some esteemed guests, including US Master and Australian Master, to talk about the changes in the book. And halfway through talking about the changes, we realized that the rule of ignores concealed is a little bit flawed, because it doesn't really work well in ignoring concealed from difficult terrain, because when a unit is in difficult terrain, it is both concealed and obscured. It is concealed because 50% or more of its base is in the difficult terrain, so this rule ignores it. But when you draw a line into a unit in the forest, it's also obscured because the line passes through more than 50% or 50% or more of terrain. So we realized this, and hence we're like, okay, ignores concealed is not a very good rule, because it's not working as intended, and that's the stance we kept for the rest of the podcast episode. So after that, I did feedback privately towards Mantic, but the answer that came back to me was that there was no issue and I've misinterpreted the rules. Okay, and a player who probably heard the podcast, I think he agrees with our assessment of the rules. Definitely he would have read the rules in the rulebook, and so he realized this, so he posted the question in Fanatics. So is ignore concealed useless because the target is both concealed and obscured? Alright, so the diagram is something like this. So this unit is completely in the forest. This cannon shooting at it ignores the concealment, because now cannons ignores concealed, right? But it doesn't ignore the obscurement of this part. When you draw a line, okay, this whole area is passing through terrain, so the obscured sounds true, right? So there was a video released and RC also clarified, and this is the exact wording from the RC, and it says if you're within a forest, the unit is then not behind it. So the line of sight requirement for being an obscure target is met, but not the behind part. You can't be behind, within and behind the one piece of difficult terrain. And yep, further it also emphasized that think of behind and within as mutually exclusive. As soon as something counts as being within, it is no longer behind it. Okay, so the thing is, this assessment is not really well supported by the rules that's written in the rulebook. So I don't quite agree with this assessment, but it is the official clarification. So although officially ruled, I don't really like the specific words in the rule that is used to justify the ruling. Okay, so I wanted to put my issue in with the wordings for public discussion, since there's already a public post posted about it, right? So I said, concealed and obscured are not mutually exclusive conditions. If you tow into the forest, the line of sight line passes through the trees and you get your hence obscured. If you are within the forest with your front edge still inside the forest, the line of sight line still passes through the trees to get to you, so you're still obscured, and on top of that, you're concealed. Another player echoed the RC's reply that within and behind are mutually exclusive. And at this point, I'm like, okay, if the RC is gonna go this way, if the official ruling is gonna go this way, so I just put in my final thoughts, which is sure. But as far as technical games rules writing go, the writing of the rules could have been done better. There's a lot of emphasis on how to determine the obscure target, which talks about the line of sight lines, rather than this term that behind, which the key, the crux of this ruling is depending on. Where this word was found is more like an introductory paragraph. So same for how to determine concealed target, half its base within difficult terrain rather than just within. I'd like it if there was an extra paragraph that also details that being within a piece of terrain cannot be considered behind for obscure target, or an FAQ to clarify that within and behind are mutually exclusive, because this is also not codified in the rules. So, but I will play as such since that is the intent. The response I got was this on publicly as a comment. As others have said, concealed is within something, obscured is behind something. Could it have been clearer? Probably. But to be honest, you haven't helped yourself here by thinking a paragraph is introductory and getting caught up on the second paragraph in isolation. The best written rules in the world won't help if you're skipping entire sections. Well, that's quite a strong reply, ain't it? That thread was subsequently locked by the author, but I'd like to explain my analysis of the rules. For the rules junkies, this rest of the video is to talk about the rules in detail. And I'm aiming to be constructively critical in this video. So if you're here to just wonder how it's played, how the game is played, and the official ruling, this is the ruling. If you're here to find out more about how I break down and dissect the rules in detail and what I find issue with and how it can be improved, stay tuned. Okay, so let's buckle up. So when you approach writing rules, do think of it in a very technical way. It is like it's like the law, like legal contracts, right? Because you are writing the law of the world, how to move, how to fight. These are the laws of the world. And there's a lot of capitalization of key terms in legal contracts, because if this word is capitalized, it's a keyword, it's a key term. I'm not a lawyer myself, but I'm in the insurance line, and in my line of work, I do read a lot of insurance policy contracts. Rules written need to be understood by new players by reading it or, referring back to it, not by, understanding the context of the evolution of the game, or by just asking seasoned players, hey, how do you play this? Okay, I'm just gonna listen, take your word for it, and this is how I'm gonna play. It's very important as we analyze the rules to read the rules objectively too. I can't stress this enough, because very often we have confirmation bias. That means we have an idea of how it is supposed to work already. So when we read the rule, we are already very biased to look out for things that we say, yep, that's how it works. But if you read it, break it down, and analyze the wording, it might not be true. A little bit of myself, I read rulebooks from end to end. Okay, so how I learn a new tabletop war game, I play the game once as a demo game, I like it. Then before I even get my second demo game, I will read the rulebook from end to end, because I want to know the confines of the world, what is all the interactions in the game. I've played quite a few number of games as well. You can see here listed: Warhammer Fantasy, 40k, Q Team, Warcry, God Tier, Warhammer Hordes, Dead Zone, Firefight, Armada, Guild Ball, and Malifaux. And I read all the rulebooks. So, and I get it, rules writing isn't simple. I also come from a computing background, programming background, and like programming, when you edit the code, right, or you add an extra feature, sometimes that few lines of code doesn't interact well with the rest of the system and it breaks the entire program. Sometimes we don't get it right the first time we write it. We might think, okay, we can think as comprehensively as possible, but still some obscure thing breaks the whole thing. So it's important to test, launch, monitor, and fix and improve as time goes on. And the next segment, I'll try my best to explain as best as I can with multiple examples and points. But so it might seem a little bit repetitive, but bear with me here. So here we go into the crux of it. The cover rules, I'm taking this from the Mantic companion rules, but you can find it in the physical rulebook, page 32. When targeting an enemy unit that has in cover, the firing unit receives a -1 to hit modifier with their ranged attack. Okay, we get this. There are two most common ways unit may be in cover, and I'll explain below. But a unit can be granted cover from other sources. Regardless of how many different sources a target unit may have, the firing unit may only receive a single -1 to hit cover modifier. So the first common one is obscured target, and this is new in version 3.5. So in cases where the target unit is partially visible behind another unit or terrain piece, they are considered to be an obscured target. An obscured target is classed as being in cover. So if you look at this paragraph, most of the words they don't contain key terms. That means they don't have any capitalized words other than obscured target and cover. These are key terms, as we can see in this section. So in the official ruling, there's a lot of key emphasis of this term behind. If you're behind terrain, you can't be within it, and vice versa. The question is, what is partially visible behind? Because these are layman words, right? They're not key terms, so it needs to be defined. Because look, if I'm just gonna search the dictionary for behind, it is at the far side of something. So when we look at this diagram here, this cannon is trying to fire at this unit of elo high. There's two forests like this. Is this considered behind? If I just take this context from this paragraph, we can't really determine, because what's the rules of determining whether a unit is behind or not, right? It's diagonally behind this piece, diagonally behind this piece. So is diagonally behind counted? We don't know, just based on this part of the rule. So we have to, at this point, think that we don't fully know how to play Kings of War yet. So we're just reading to this part of the rules. So how about this diagram? Is this behind? Okay, because it's partially overlapping, right? So it's overlapping behind. If I just read from this paragraph, I can't make a decision yet. Okay, what about this one? Is this behind? The forest is in between, but it's off to the side, right? What about this one? Is this behind? So of course, if you're a veteran player, you know the answers to all these questions, but we have to dial back to breaking down the rules, so we have to look at it this way. Okay, so is this behind? Okay, because the Elohai seems nearer than the forest, right, to the cannon. So is this behind or not? There's no answer. So the answer is actually here to determine whether the target unit is obscured. So you have to draw line of sight from the firing unit to the facing and the arc of the unit that is that you're firing. Okay, so it's in the Elohai's front arc. So you have to draw a line to the front arc. So like this. If the line passes, at least half of it passes over intervening units or terrain, including difficult terrain that the target is in contact. Okay, so this Elohai is in contact with this forest, it is included. And if at least half, then the target unit is considered an obscured target. So there is a line here. So just slightly more than half of the frontage is in the forest. So yes, using these wording that have all the requirements, including tons of key terms, line of sight, leader points, notice how the capital letters. And this is how you determine whether it's an obscured target, and it seems to be, this is how it is used to determine whether it's behind. Okay, because once again, if we just take the first paragraph, it doesn't contain enough definition requirements set out for us to determine. So similarly for concealed, the word within, okay, in case a unit sought shelter within terrain, the target is considered a concealed target and it's classed as in cover. So how to define within? So at least half of its base is within difficult terrain. Note that line of sight, wow, this is quite a extensive portion of the rulebook as well. It's in one full page dedicated to it at page 15. So there's a lot of discussion on how to get line of sight, and comes with lots of diagrams as well. Why is the rules written like this? So what's with that behind paragraph? So a lot of rules, when they're written, they will talk about the benefit and penalty. In this case, it's a penalty, right? -1 cover modifier. The condition and status which grants it, which is obscured and concealed, and the requirements to get them, how to get obscured and concealed. And very often, rules would include a general description. And what is a general description? Using layman English language to describe the conditions and requirements, to give you a basic understanding and idea before diving into the technical portions, the definition and explanations. Why do we have this? Because if we just read the condition requirements straight away, it might be very hard to stomach and grasp. So I'm going to use another game to talk about this, which is Warhammer Q Team 2021 version. They also have cover rules. So if you look at this, if an operative positions themselves in cover, right, they will use it for protection while they have engaged order, or hide behind it while they have a concealed order. So these are, look, use it for protection, very generic sounding. Hide behind it, very generic sounding. There's no capitalized letters in these two underlined phrases. But engage and conceal, yeah, they're key terms, right? That's why there's a capitalized. So this portion is actually a general description. Yeah, if you get cover, no, you'll get protection while you engage, and you get to hide behind it while conceal. What does it actually mean to hide and to have protection? Well, it's described further. So next part is the requirements, how to get cover. And the benefits is conferred in another section on the rules. So the benefits here, this is just giving you a rough understanding of the benefits, while in the next section, it describes the benefit. And the benefit while concealed is that if you are concealed and you're visible to the enemy, you're not obscured, and only when you're not in cover that the opponent has line of sight and can shoot at you. So that's what hiding behind means. If you're in cover and concealed, they can't shoot at you, they can't see you. You know, if I just read this, wow, it's very hard to digest logical sense. Oh, they can't see you. If you're engaged, right, even behind cover, they can shoot at you. Only the protection comes in here. When you roll for defense, you get one automatic success. So it doesn't reference protection or hide behind, because these are general words. It doesn't reference back to this. So by the way, some of you might think, oh, GW games have very bad rules. Actually, they're actually getting better and better. Maybe not the main 40k and AOS, but the box games like Q-Team, right? They're actually getting tighter and tighter, the rule set. And they released errata every 3 months. So if anything's unclear, they always fix it in 3 months. So that's quite good. So other game companies out there, they can't rest on their laurels anymore, because Games Workshop, the big juggernaut who's often criticized for having bad rules, their rules are getting better. Let's come back to this. If we look at the structure of how the rules are presented, this is the bonus, this is the general description. Gives you an idea, yeah, if you're behind. Okay, no capitalized words, no key terms, okay, layman language. And then these are the actual requirements. Oh wow, you have to do this complicated thing of drawing a line of sight line from the leader point, from your firing target to the arc of the target that is within the unit is firing in. Wow, it's quite a lot of words. So same for here, general description, and this is the actual requirements. To have the official ruling say, hey, no, you have to look at this word behind. This word behind is important. That's actually quite strange. This is the general description, and this is actually the proper rules to define how it's done. In fact, these words have been split into obscured and concealed, but majority of these words have been carrying over since Kings of War version 2 release in 2015. Of course, there was an errata that cleaned this up a little bit, but if you can see, the text is very, very similar. So even in the explanation video, I'm gonna play it. I muted the sound, but just pay attention to the cursor. It talks about behind. Behind gets obscured. Okay, then the question is, what is behind? Behind is this, intervening units. The narration just said between. This is the full sentence, right? So to define it, yeah, half of the line of sight lines passes over this units and terrain intervening in between, right? And it includes the terrain that the target is contact with. Okay, so this portion is defined by this portion. Okay, so what is behind is here. So if we fulfill this condition over here, then we should be considered partially visible behind, which means it's obscured. Okay, and similarly, if we fulfill this condition, we should be within and it's concealed. Okay, and there's no rules that says I can't be obscured and concealed at the same time. So no rules regarding these two portions being mutually exclusive, except the official ruling want us to use English language to say you can't be behind and within something at the same time. We should be taking it technically, not English language logic. After the ruling was said, okay, you can't be behind and within at the same time. So okay, if we want us to use English language to understand this, so then two other persons posted questions. So this person say, okay, if B backs up, now he's half within the forest, so he's not behind. And if less than 50%, it's not within as well, isn't it? So that was the question. And this person pretty much asked the same thing, just drawing this diagram. Okay, he's partially inside. So is he behind or not? Because if you want me to use English language to define this, I would say it's partially within. But the ruling is, no, it's behind because it's no longer within. And within is 50%. Okay, if this unit is 49% in the forest, if you pull a guy to look at this diagram and say, hey, is this behind? No, he's partially inside the forest. Okay, but because I'm not within, I'm considered behind it. There's another issue I have with the wording is that these two parts are repeated. In cases of this, considered to be an obscure target. And then this, considered an obscure target. So you see it's repeating. So is it this requirement or is it this requirement? Because they're different, right? Because this is just using very little words and this has a chunk of requirements. Same thing here. This concealed one is a more prominent example. If within terrain, concealed. And then this same thing, considered concealed. But this one at least says half of its base within terrain. So you notice that if I were to compare it word for word, these requirements are not the same. So what's wrong with this? If we look at cover rules before this 3.5 rulebook, if the target unit is partially visible behind, the firing unit might suffer cover. Now this is word of a difference, this one word, might suffer cover, because it's not just reading this part. Okay, so if this guy is partially visible behind, he might suffer cover. So how do you determine it for sure? It's actually this part, right? You read the rest of it, the technical portion of defining what is behind. And if we look at another set of rules, Firefight 2nd edition, the author for Firefight 2nd edition used a lot of wordings from Kings of War, so most of these words are pretty much the same. There's a might here, and to decide whether the target unit is in cover, follow the rules for line of sight. units which have partially blocked line of sight will be in cover. The author for Firefight did one step above, and to me is an improvement because he has a whole segment of line of sight similar to Kings of War, and straight after that, partially blocked line of sight, because it makes logical sense to present it this way. Since we're talking about line of sight, we're drawing lots of diagram showing you the lots of lines, so why not we have another segment immediately after that to showcase to you what is partially blocked, once again with lots of diagrams. So lastly, even if we were to take the official ruling behind and within are mutually exclusive, it still makes ignore conceal a very awkward rule, especially during this interaction, because look at this. This large infantry unit, it may be an elo high, it might be other units, right? It is towing into the forest. So now it's considered obscured. Cannon only ignores concealed. So when you're towing in the forest, the cannon suffers -1 cover penalty because it doesn't ignore obscured. But when this unit moves deeper in, which seems to provide more protection, suddenly the cannon is more accurate because it ignores concealed. Logically, it's a bit strange, right? I'm towing in the forest, I get cover, then I slide deeper in, your ignores concealed works. Because this difficult terrain has a possibility of providing two types of cover. Sometimes you're obscured, sometimes you're concealed. So I believe the intention to have the ignores concealed rule is to be able to ignore the cover that this terrain protects entirely. The forest doesn't protect you from the cannon, no matter which angle you're standing in the forest, within the forest, behind the forest. So that makes more logical sense to me if you create the rule to work this way. So am I overthinking this whole situation? I think not, because I did ask other players that are very into rules, and they say, yeah, I agree with 100% of what you say and need to change the wording. And same here, there are few things that need clarification. The rule does not specify how much of the unit must be behind. Okay, to gain obscured, this creates few problems as the term behind is not qualified elsewhere in the section. Okay, language is used is imprecise, so you need to be more precise in the language. You're right, at least for rules as written. And I'd like to point out that it's very difficult to feedback these issues in fanatics, because there will always be supporters and dissenters, and then sometimes becomes a shouting match. Things are not taken constructively. So at this point, if you were to tell me, yeah, you can't be obscured within and behind at the same time, yeah, I can accept this answer. Once you explain it, yep, it's very easy to determine, but it's not codified in the rules properly. And a lot of times, as a player, sometimes we just take it as it is. Okay, it's ruled this way, I'm just gonna do this. But for me, I just want to go one step ahead. So perhaps I'm overthinking. The rules should be written cleanly. So how to fix or improve this? So I'll show you different iterations of how I gradually improve upon it until we arrive at the final solution. If you want behind to be a key term, then you capitalize it. And in fact, it's this whole phrase, right? Behind another unit or terrain piece. Sounds like a mouthful for a key phrase. So maybe next you can rewrite the whole thing to be behind intervening or something like that. But then you use this term consistently throughout the rest of the section, right? So if the target is partially visible behind another unit or terrain piece, they're considered obscured. Obscured is classed as being in cover. So to determine whether you're behind, then this is the criteria. And in fact, I noticed this while preparing this video. There's nothing in the rulebook that actually says you sweep across from the firing unit to the target. It just says draw line of sight. So it's like sort of wanting to imply that you sweep across, but I think if you add this wording, sweeping in a cone across, it will be easier for the audience to grasp. I wanted to say triangle, but I think cone makes it easier for people to understand, because I think partially Dungeons and Dragons, they are cone-based spell effects. And what could be done better is to add diagrams to show the cone, to show the sweeping diagrams. Okay, there's none so far. It's like this half, blah, 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 blah. Then the target unit is considered behind. And it's already said behind is considered obscured. And obscured is classed as being in cover. So same thing for within. So within terrain becoming capitalized. Okay, it's considered concealed. And then the definition, since within the word is being used as the keyword, then I don't want to use the word within again. So change this to in. Adding one line, if a unit is within, it cannot be considered behind the same piece of terrain. There's one probably a very obvious issue with this. Why do I have to go like one extra step? Why do I have to say behind? Behind is obscured, obscured is in cover. You notice there's one extra unnecessary term. Why do I need a behind term and why do I need an obscured term? And so that's where we should eliminate one or the other. So obviously, it seems like obscured target and concealed target seems to be the more prominent terms rather than the behind, which started out as a small b. Okay, so we should use obscured target as the main part. So this is my next section of gradual improvement, iterating on this improvement. So let's focus on obscured target and not the behind wording. So, and of course we must say it might be obscured. So to determine for sure, let's read through this. So there's much less changes here. And then you need the extra qualifier because now a unit can qualify both requirements. So you have to say a concealed target may not be considered an obscured target from the same piece of terrain. Sounds very technical. Adding brackets, explaining in layman terms. So a unit that's concealed within a terrain cannot be considered to be obscured behind the same piece of terrain. With this layman language, yes, we can do this. But even without these brackets, if we read it in detail, we will know, okay, if I'm concealed, I can't be considered obscured by the same piece of terrain. I think this is much cleaner, but one other issue is this. We only used to have cover. Now we have cover, and then obscured target and concealed target ignores concealed, ignores obscured. So there's 4 more terms being added to the game. And my question is, do we really need to add 4 new terms to the game? So why not we keep it as just cover? So this is version 3 rules and just adding the sweeping in the cone. It's already said these are the one of the 2 requirements, right? This is concealed and this is obscured. So the base rules doesn't need to split between concealed and obscured. Rather, your special rules. So only, you don't have to force everyone to read what is concealed and what is obscured. You just need everybody to understand what is cover. And those units with these special rules, then you just need to figure out, what do they ignore? So this is the ignores cover rule that was introduced in Clash 21 and 22. It doesn't ignore all sorts of covers. That's the gripe people have right now. Ignore cover doesn't ignore all cover. So you can just change the name of the rule, ignores intervening. And this wording doesn't change. The firing unit only suffers cover penalties for units that have at least half their base within difficult terrain. So they only get concealment cover. And similarly ignores concealment. So if the target have at least half their base within difficult terrain, the firing unit does not suffer any cover penalties from that piece of terrain. So that also eliminates the problem of being both concealed and obscured. So once you're within it, firing unit ignores that terrain piece completely. So this, I think, is a better fix. You're just changing the name of one rule and you're just adding one more special rule. So if the unit doesn't have this special rule, nobody needs to bother about this. Okay, you don't need to complicate the base game. But once again, awkward interaction. So if I'm not within, the cannon suffers cover. When I'm within, the cannon suddenly becomes more accurate. I believe the intention is to ignore the cover that the difficult terrain provides, whether it's obscured or concealed. So instead of ignore concealment, I would say ignores difficult terrain cover. So I think the philosophy is to have the cannon ignores the penalty from the forest. So the firing unit, the cannon, ignores difficult terrain when considering whether the target is in cover. You don't get cover from the forest, no matter what kind of cover it is. Okay, but of course it still potentially blocks line of sight, so you still need to have line of sight. It's not like the forest is invisible. So here's another fix that I would propose that makes the game less awkward, the interaction less awkward. Coming to that, let's talk about units that have ignores concealed. There's a total of 4 units that ignores concealed. That's very, very little compared to ignores obscured. There's quite a few cannons and catapults and mortars, the like out there. Why I said 4(6? Because there's only the Dwarf Cannon, the Kingdoms of Men Cannon, Madriga, and the Redkin Shredder. And of course, the cannon is in 2 armies. The Dwarf Cannon is also in 3 Dwarfs. The Kingdoms of Men Cannon is in League of Rhodia. This obscured and concealed, right, they are synonyms and it draws confusion. Same thing like withdraw and what's disengage. They sound so similar. So do we need this complication? Withdraw and disengage has already drawn so much confusion and issues. Do we need to introduce 2 more words that sound the same? How much does it really add to the game? And so this is where I'm gonna take a look at this from a rule design point of view. Ignoring rules is generally not a good design idea because it takes away player agency, the ability for the opponent to make decisions or for yourself to make decisions because you don't ignore certain rules. This rule is there, so you have to make decisions about it. So that's also partially why Caterpillar was taken away, right? Because it gives you the ability to ignore the penalty of difficult terrain. And if every army takes it, every army no longer have to make difficult choices about what to do about this difficult terrain. Just put my Pathfinder unit that ignores the rules. Sometimes we should see if we can solve the problem by simplifying rules instead of complicating them. And where did this ignores cover subsequently becoming ignores certain types of cover and now turning into obscure, concealed, ignore obscure, ignores concealed? Where did all this problem start with? It started with 48-inch war engines, and specifically the 48-inch range war engines with very high piercing. That's your cannon, mortars, catapults, and all these variants. Okay, when 3rd edition started, it started a little too strong, and being 48-inch range and ignoring cover, there's little that the opponent can do. No matter where I place, you can shoot at me, and no matter where I stand, you ignore my cover. Okay, the only thing I can do is hide behind blocking terrain and you can't see me. But if I want to move my unit forward, I can't bring the blocking terrain with me. I would argue that it wasn't too strong, but it just didn't feel fun because the opponent can't do anything about it. And with low number of attacks and the good blast amount, the damage can be very swingy as well. You win the roll to go first, you start shooting your cannons, you roll hot, you start putting 1 or 2 of my hordes off before I start my turn, when it's not even in the average dice that it should happen. So it's not a very nice game experience. So then, to curb this problem, the RC at the time implemented this rule: ignore cover no longer ignores all sorts of cover. So it gives the defending player an agency, an ability to say, okay, if I don't want this unit to get shot, I can do something about it. I put it in difficult terrain. Okay, that's since Clash 21. But at that time, buffs were being given to other shooting units, basically units with 24-inch bows and 18-inch piercing 1 shooting. They both got buffed by becoming regular. When that changed, 18-inch piercing 1 shooting became more prevalent. Lots of heart piercers and flame bearers. And then in Clash 22, both shooting got further buffs. Cleat stalkers got stronger, more attacks, better profiles, unit strength. They're regular, right? So they unlock by these shooting units becoming stronger. This shooting bow units edge out both war engines and piercing 1 18-inch shooting, because 18-inch shooting is on 5 speed 5 units. So by moving 5 and shooting 18, they only tread 23 inches. So the bows can stand out of 23 inches of you, shoot at you, and you can't shoot back, and they get to shoot at you the next turn. So they just bully these 18-inch piercing 1 units. And of course, they edge out war engines as well, because if I have a good shooting unit that unlocks, that scores, that can move and shoot, why do I want to bring war engines anymore? War engines, they have innate weaknesses compared to other shooting options. They don't score, they have the reload, so they can't move and fire. So if you face the wrong angle, that's it, 1 turn, no shooting. Okay, they don't unlock, and they need to be unlocked. Okay, they can't move at the double and they can't cross obstacles, so that's a lot of penalties for war engines. The problem is because ignoring cover and 48-inch range removes player agency. It feels like the defending player have little they can do about it. Why not we consider attacking these 2 areas? Okay, first thing is, what about we reduce the range to 24, 28, 30, 36, or even 40-inch? By not having the ability to shoot the entire board willy-nilly, the defending player can say, okay, if I don't want this unit to be shot by the cannon, I can deploy it further back. Then it can't be shot at the cannon turn 1. Another thing I would like to work on more is, why not we just remove this rule of ignoring cover? If war engines don't ignore cover and they suffer penalties, won't it be very poor? So how about we improve their shooting, their ranged attack to 4+ instead, and then they're affected by all cover. So we are actually improving the situation by removing the 1 rule. And you can always adjust other things. You can always adjust the number of attacks of the war engine, how much it blasts, how much it pierces, and even the point cost, and to roughly equate the same outcome. I'm gonna break this down. Different war engines with different attack profiles. So they have heavy mortar, they have 2 attacks and blast D3+2. Cannons, catapults, the like, they all have D3+1 blast, 2 attacks. More pulp launchers, 3 attacks, range 4+, but only blast D3. And the Wrecking Shredder, 4 attacks, blast D3. So these are the main profiles of these types of war engines out there. Currently, they hit on 5+, right? And they only suffer obscured cover, most of them. Some of them suffer concealed cover. I'm using this example. I'm using 3 of each. 3 Angkor heavy mortars. On average, they'll have 8 hits, because out of 6 dice rolled on a 5+, 2 of them will be a success. And on the blast, the average result of each blast is 2+2, 4. So the average is 8 hits. If I suffer cover, it suddenly becomes 6. This is a massive issue also with hitting on 5+, changing to hitting on 6+, because it's a 50% drop in efficiency. So from 8 hits, it becomes 4 hits. And my maximum number of hits, if I roll hot, I roll all hits, blast the maximum amount is 30 hits. That's quite crazy, right? The amount of hits that it can blast to. If you go down the list, similar. Okay, now the more pop launcher is different because their range value is 4 plus. When they suffer penalty, it becomes 5 plus. Their drop is only 33% in efficiency. This is also quite extreme. So when your heavy mortars drop in 50% efficiency against cover, is a very heavy penalty. I bring 300 plus worth of points. They're only worth 150 points right now, especially when you use these against Night Stalkers because they all have stealth. You immediately suffer a 50% drop in your efficiency, whereas Glade Stalkers only suffer a 33% drop in their efficiency because it's from 4 to 5 plus. Proposed improvement. They suffer all sorts of cover now, but you improve their range attack to 4 plus. To mitigate the massive number of hits, I reduced the blast by 1. So instead of plus 2 for heavy mortar, it's plus 1. Your cannons, instead of plus 1, is just D3. Ratkin Shredder, instead of D3, it becomes D2. The mop-up is already range 4 plus, so I did not change it. Almost the same, right? Heavy mortar, instead of 8 is 9, 6, 6, 8 is 9. It is slightly more accurate when the opponent has no cover, but if they suffer cover, it's not as bad, so it's not as extreme. It's only a 33% drop in efficiency from 9 to 6. But they are more likely to suffer this penalty because they don't ignore cover at all. So I think it's a fair trade-off. Okay, slightly more accurate or the same when the opponent has no cover, and if the opponent has cover, it's not drastically worse, but at the same time they are more likely to suffer it. And because the blast amount is reduced, the max hits is also reduced, so you don't have those crazy rolls where, oh, 2 guys took out the entire horde. Another suggestion is to remove blast entirely, and I just up the number of attacks. So you see it achieves the same results, but the max hits is reduced because there's no more blast. The same average results. If whatever we change to is too good, then you can always adjust the points upwards a little bit. Or if it's too weak, certain players have toyed with the idea of adding unit strength to war engines, which is also a possible fix or improvement to a unit without introducing more rules. So that's how I'll fix the war engine issue. From having this concealed and obscured issue, now we break it back down. Now, you know, a lot of people say being in the rules committee is a thankless job. You know, they pour hours and hours into it, this game, without much gratification. Sometimes even get lots of negativity thrown at them. Some people ask, if it were me, would I want to do it? And I've thought about this and I'll say, yeah, I really love this game and I really want to see it in a better place. If Mantic, if you're watching this, if you'd like to consider me for RC, let's have a chat, you know. I see some problems and I want to be part of the solution. I'm willing to set aside some time for it because I really love this game. Consider this video a demonstration or portfolio of what my thought process is and how things could be done. Talking about RC, I really also have some other ideas regarding the RC and not just the rules segment of it, right? We could really use a proper feedback channel. There's a New Kings of War RC Facebook page, but you can't send messages to it. Well, what about maybe email or, you know, a website form that makes it a little bit of a barrier for people to ask questions, because not a lot of people like to send emails or fill in a website form nowadays. And even before that, you can ask them, hey, before asking your question, have you checked out the FAQ? And even after they send an email, there could always be an automatic reply as well and say, hey, we receive a lot of questions every day. We'll get to them when we can, but in the meantime, you might want to check the FAQ first. Your answer might already be in there. And if it's already in there, do send us a reply so that we can close the case. So that sort of reduces the load, right? And communication channel to the community also, to talk about, hey, we're aware that people are debating these rules. Do we post it direct to fanatics? Maybe not, because that encourages heated debates, right? And not to use our own personal Facebook accounts, but on the RC Facebook page. So it's like, okay, we noticed that people are discussing this issue. We are looking into it. Please wait as we deliberate. Or, hey, we realize we have looked into it and there's this issue, so we're gonna currently rule it this way, and if need be, we're gonna adjust the wordings or add it as a FAQ. Or no issue with the rules, but we'll monitor if people continue to be confused and we might need clarification. And the thing about it is, feedback is useful even when not delivered in the best tone. A lot of times people give feedback in a very angry tone because they're upset with the rules not working or they're unhappy with buff or nerfs. But behind that anger, behind that emotion, there is a genuine feedback there that this person really feels that the game shouldn't be this way, this unit shouldn't be this way. It could be taken into consideration, but maybe like just take note, and if a lot of people feels that way, then something should be done about it. But of course, I'd like to encourage everyone to remain cordial. And yeah, so let's try to always provide constructive criticism so that parties on both sides don't respond emotionally. That concludes our discussion of concealed and obscured. Hope you enjoyed this video. You can post about your thoughts, and if you'd like to discuss, debate with me, do post it in the comments section. I do have a Patreon and I have patrons. I like to thank them. 1 peep Anonymous, 2 peep Luke Schaefer, and 3 peep Guy Harper. And with that, I'd like to see you guys in the next video. Thank you.